Hello again, gamers and gamettes, and welcome to another episode of Not So Hardcore Gaming. I'm your host, Jeremy, and today we'll be talking about Outlast 2. But before we get into the episode, I'd like to just quickly address for a moment. I wasn't able to get an episode out last week. Last week was a bit different. There was also a bit of a family health emergency, so I think I was just in a bit of a different headspace and was unable to get an episode recorded. I even at one point forgot to bring my recording equipment back with me, so it wasn't quite possible in the end. And instead I'll be releasing 2 episodes this week, as I usually try to do. And again, I apologize for last week. And without further ado, let's get into it. As always, we'll start with visuals and audio. So, this is, again, one I don't really have any complaints. The game looked quite good to me. There was a lot of good detail in it. I did love the use of the night vision camera. I think that did add a bit of a creep factor to it. You know, the way it distorts things a little bit makes them look unnatural, where you'll see the eyes of someone nearby and they just have a creepy glow to them. I think it did add to the atmosphere of the game. And obviously you had to use it in certain areas where there was no light. You couldn't see anything otherwise. So from a game mechanic standpoint as well, it was good, and we will get into that later. But visually it was more than enough detail in it. Things just sort of looked creepy. You know, there was blood everywhere, and that's just part of the atmosphere for any horror game. And yeah, so there's not like a hell of a lot to say about it visually. It was done well, and the night vision camera was designed well, that it fit in with the atmosphere of the game. In terms of audio, the voice acting was done well for a lot of the characters. When you come across the enemy, it's just the easiest way to say it, the way they're voiced, they do sound like they're genuinely off the hinge. You know, that they sound insane. So it was done well. It sounded how you'd expect them to sound. Your character was voiced quite well again, and I think that's really the majority of the sound you come across through the game is the voices. And I have no complaints towards that. The music, now I haven't played the game for a little bit. I played this a while back. It would have been around the time I released my Mario Kart Wii review, so it's been a bit longer since I've played it, and having very poor internet at home, I wouldn't have been able to download it and play through. And even when I did play it originally, I couldn't finish the game, and we'll get into that a bit further after as well. But yeah, in terms of the music, I don't remember as much about it, but I think the thing that needs to be recognized, I didn't have any complaints about it anyway through it. So in terms of this section of the game, the visuals and the audio, no complaints whatsoever. No raving either. It wasn't exceptional. It wasn't bad. It was good. And that's about what I can say for that. Next up, as always, is gameplay. Now, as I've said many times before, this is the most important part to any game. If you have a great story, it's a visually beautiful game, but the gameplay isn't fun, it's not a good game. So I think that's why it is so important, is it has to be fun and engaging. And for this game, I didn't enjoy the gameplay. Since I first tried out one of these, I've been introduced to the term walking simulator. Now, to give you an exact definition, so to speak, of what a walking simulator is, says walking simulators or environmental narrative games are narrative games that generally eschew any type of gameplay outside of movement and environmental interaction that allows players to experience their story through exploration and discovery. And when done right, I'm sure it can be quite engaging and quite fun to play for some people. But for me, and this is probably one of the only walking simulators I've ever played, I didn't find it fun. There was just too little to do for me personally. And I guess sort of with it, not having the power to fight back against the enemy, in this one, basically you're a pacifist, you cannot fight them off. I can agree that that alone adds to the challenge for it and can allow for the scare factor to go up in a way that you are, by definition, defenseless. And I will appreciate that for a moment, that it was done well enough that you knew if you got caught, you were screwed. That on its own was a good detail. But when all you're doing is walking and, occasionally flipping your night vision on, you change batteries, you use a bandage, that's all you can do, and I just didn't find it engaging. In terms of the way it was designed, the controls are done well. The controls are easy enough because you don't have a lot to do. You pick it up very, very easily, and the controls, that there were no bugs that I found in it. It worked exactly how it was supposed to, and it worked well. So it was designed well from a standpoint that it works. It doesn't have any flaws to it, so to speak, except for, as I've mentioned earlier, that it just doesn't have enough to keep me engaged. Now, I've always been the type that I can get very bored doing one thing, and a lot of the times when I'll play a video game, I'll be watching YouTube in the background as well, just so I've got multiple things to focus on, and it just helps me to distract myself more while I can do both things. And even in this case, having that second thing that I'm looking at didn't really help a lot. I don't know, I couldn't get into the style of game itself, and that's a shame. This is actually one of the first games I've spoken about where I haven't really enjoyed the game. For a lot of them, I'll talk about them because I've played them more than once and I've really enjoyed them, and that's how I'll go from talking about it. It is sort of, I speak of it from a positive standpoint, and I think this is the first where I don't have much that I found really positive about it. And yeah, I thought it was time to sort of go for one where I have more criticism of it, because, as I said, I'm just not really a negative guy most of the time. If I watch a movie and most of the population doesn't enjoy it, I still do. To give you an example, I enjoyed the Green Lantern movie, and nobody enjoyed that apart from me, apparently. But I'm just the type of guy, when I get into it, I tend to enjoy it more than anything, and I don't have as much criticism most of the time. And as I said, this is just one of the first where I found myself genuinely not enjoying the game. And that's a shame. Moving on, because as I said, there's not a hell of a lot to say on the gameplay. The story itself. Again, for this, basically the story was as simple as you get stranded in the land controlled by cultists and you have to escape. That's the basic mission for it. You have to escape, you find your partner and get through it. Again, very, very basic, and all you're really doing throughout the game is you're discovering notes that people have written, letters that they've written all over the place, and you're documenting it because you're a journalist. That's why you've got the camera, and all of the controls are done through the camera. You view it through the camera, and that's how you use the night vision. And yeah, it's sort of you're documenting everything you come across, and you're having to get past the other cultists where you can. There's a lot of escaping when you're being chased, that sort of thing. But there's not as much in terms of the story. Again, there's not much complicated. There's not a lot to go and discover. And I think that can draw away from it as well. With a lot of games that you come across, you can explore more and find more parts of the story. And for this one, there just wasn't much roaming you could do. And I prefer a game where you can roam a little bit. And I do understand in this case it may not work for the style of game that it is. Because this is a walking simulator, it's sort of roaming may not fit with the genre. But for me, again, it just sort of, it made me feel confined and made me feel like there was even less that I could do, which just took away from it more. And yeah, it's sort of, there's only one linear path you can go. And that to me just didn't appeal as much. There's not a hell of a lot else that comes with the story, really. It's basic, and it I don't know, just something about it didn't quite work for me because there was so little. And I think now we get to the final bit, which is the scare factor. That's what I want to talk about, because I haven't spoken about horror games before, and this is important to any horror game, whether it creeps you out or scares you, whatever else. This game, I think for myself, when I was first playing it, the only reason I found it scary basically was my anxiety. I knew the game I was playing. I knew it was a horror game. I knew there would be jump scares that came with it, and that sort of thing. And so my anxiety was through the roof playing it. And I think if I didn't have anxiety, it wouldn't have done anything to me. When you go through it and you start to find these notes, what you read isn't scary stuff. It doesn't scare you. Just look at it and think, that's screwed up. And I think that's I think that's a distinction between the two. And when you come across it, I look at it and I think, when I'm reading it, I just think the game developers must have just basically gone to me and say, okay, what can we say that would be the most screwed up thing we could possibly think of as shock value? And shock value, I don't think, is the same as scare. I don't think shock and horror tend to go together. And for this, just a lot of what you come across was shocking, not really scary. And that just doesn't quite do it for me. It's sort of, the atmosphere was creepy, sure, The jump scares did get me, that's for sure. But there's story elements that you come across when you discover what the cultists do and what the community is. That didn't scare me. It sort of just... it put me off a little bit, and because I think it was a bit over the top, and it was basically just say whatever you can to shock people, it didn't really do it for me. I don't think it worked with the game. If they had more to it, where I mean, look, I'm not a game developer. I'm not really that great for it, and I know there are only certain ways you can do it. But I feel like there could have been another way that could have actually caused more scare factor, more anxiety, whatever else. But this, it was just messed up, and it didn't appeal to me for that reason. And that's really all I can say on the scare factor. It's underwhelming, and it could have done so many things better. It could have gotten me more, but I just couldn't get into it. I was only scared because of anxiety, and that was it. And now we come to towards the end of the episode, and here is where I feel I couldn't even finish the game. I think I was probably towards the end of the game, and you get to a section where you have one guy roaming around, and I think you have to go up to get a wheel to stop turning so you can crawl under it. I think that's basically what it is, and it's a very small confined area, and there's only a few spots you can hide, and you have to get around this guy, crawl through that, and continue on. And that was where I got stuck through the game. Even when I found a guide, I couldn't use what it said other people use to get past. I locked the door to keep him in, and even then I still couldn't get past it in time. I had gotten past him and crawled under it once, but then I think I got lost as to where I was going and died. And after spending I think a couple hours trying to get past this one section of the game, and I couldn't do it, I think that's where I really looked at, and thought to myself, I kind of don't want to continue trying to get past, because that was when I really looked at it, and I thought, I've been in this spot for ages, and I'm not enjoying it. I haven't enjoyed it much up to this point. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I hated it the whole way through. I was enjoying it enough that I could continue playing it for a while. But then once I got stuck, I thought, I'm not enjoying this enough to keep playing. And once I reached that point, I stopped, I gave up, and I ended up deleting the game. Because when you get stuck in one spot for a while, and it's sort of like, for any game, no matter how good the gameplay is, whatever else, it gets just frustrating after a while, and you don't have the motivation to continue playing it. And I had already had that for a while. I would have to, after playing it for a bit, I'd have to switch to another game because I started to get bored. And then once I got stuck, I realized just how bored I was, that I hadn't been enjoying it as much, and that's where I finished. And again, that's just a shame, because this is one of the first video games I've had where I just couldn't finish it. And yeah, it's sort of, this was one of my first horror games that I came across, and the reason I had chosen to play it was, I believe it was on special, and I thought, on the podcast, I haven't spoken about horror games before. This is one to try so I can talk about it. And it just didn't end up working for me. So this is one of my first negative episodes on it, and I know I've repeated myself quite a few times on why I didn't enjoy it, but I think that just adds to the fact that there's so little to talk about. You know, because the gameplay is so simple, the story is quite linear, just there's not as much to talk about as I would have enjoyed, you know? And that's pretty much all there is to say. This game, I think, could have had a lot of potential, but it just ended up underwhelming. And I have heard Outlast 1 was a bit better. I've heard a few people saying that. Hopefully at some point I can try that as well and see if that draws me in more. But for this one, if you're someone who enjoys that sort of game, you enjoy a narrative, something like that, I can say definitely give this a go. And I'd recommend giving most games a go for yourself, because while I may not enjoy the game myself, other people might. So I do recommend at least giving it a go if you think it's something that does appeal to you. You know, when you look it up, if you look up and you look at some of the plot, that sort of thing, yeah, give it a go. But for me personally, I didn't enjoy it, and it's one I think just needs a certain type of audience, and I'm not part of that audience. Thank you for joining me today. There will be another episode out this week, and that's everything. I hope to see you again. If you want to check out more of my stuff, I'm very soon going to finish getting things uploaded to YouTube, and then every week I'll start releasing the episodes onto YouTube as well. That will be a good site where I can engage better. It will be easier to comment on older episodes, that sort of thing. And I recommend checking out my Instagram. I post quite a bit about video games that I'm currently playing, which will give you a good idea as to what future episodes will be about. I also post gym content, and that's going to be part of the next episode I release. And that's everything I have to say for this episode. Thank you again for joining me, and have a good one.